So you see a company projecting these massive profits, and you can't help but wonder, is that real or is it just wishful thinking? I mean, these forecasts are absolutely crucial for them to get loans or attract investors, but how can you tell if their crystal ball is actually clear? Let's dive in and figure that out.
In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on how these financial predictions are really put to the test. We'll start with the basics, then get into the two main types of predictions you'll run into. After that, we'll look at the super important role of the auditor, their step-by-step process, and finally, how to read their report to understand what it's actually telling you.
All right, first things first. To really get a handle on this world, we got to know the jargon. The official term for all these future-looking numbers is Prospective Financial Information, or PFI for short. And that, right there, leads us to the big question. A company shows you its grand plan for the future, all laid out in neat little numbers. But how do you know if it's based in reality? It's not like you can fact-check tomorrow's news, right?
You know, the official definition is actually pretty revealing. PFI is built entirely on assumptions about the future. The standard even flat out calls it highly subjective. In other words, it's all about judgment calls, which is exactly why it needs a pair of independent eyes on it. And this stuff isn't just for some internal meeting. No, this is the information that drives major decisions. You'll find it in the prospectus trying to win your investment, in the annual report for shareholders, and it's what a bank is going to scrutinize before handing over a massive loan. There is a lot riding on these numbers.
Now, it's not quite as simple as just one type of prediction. The standards actually give us two distinct flavors, forecasts and projections. And trust me, knowing the difference between them is absolutely key. So think of a forecast like a company aiming for the bullseye on a dartboard. It's their best guess based on what they genuinely expect to happen. A projection, on the other hand, is more like exploring the entire dartboard. It's a what-if scenario, like, say, a startup projecting revenue if they manage to break into a brand new market. It's not a promise, it's a possibility. So, with all this subjectivity flying around, who's the one that provides the reality check? Well, that's where the auditor steps in. But what they actually do is one of the most misunderstood parts of this whole game. This quote from the official standard really says it all. Let's be crystal clear about this. An auditor does not sign off on the prediction itself. They are not fortune tellers, and they will never ever say, yep, this is definitely going to happen. Okay, so if they're not validating the outcome, what's the point? Well, their job is to enhance the prediction's credibility. Think of them like a building inspector. They don't guarantee the building will never have a problem, but they check the foundation, they check the structure to give you confidence that it was built correctly in the first place. This slide lays out their checklist perfectly. First, are the assumptions reasonable? Second, is the math actually correct based on those assumptions? Third, is everything presented clearly with no sneaky hidden details? And finally, does this story about the future actually line up with the company's past performance? Now, this isn't just some random check-in. Auditors follow a very specific playbook. So let's take a little peek at their game plan. The journey is pretty straightforward. First, they decide if they're even going to take the gig. You know, if a company's predictions look like pure fantasy, they can just say, no thanks. Then they dive deep to really understand the business. Next comes the main event, examining the evidence behind the assumptions. And finally, they write it all up in their official report. And here is the single most crucial takeaway from this section. The auditor is the referee, not a player on the team. No matter how much they examine it, the ultimate responsibility for these predictions lies with the company's management. It's their forecast, their assumptions, their neck on the line. Okay, so this all leads to the final document, the auditor's report. This is where they lay out their conclusions, and learning to decode that fine print is probably the most important skill you can have in this whole process. So when you crack open that report, you're going to find a few key things. First, it makes it super clear that management is responsible. Then it'll give an opinion on if the math and the presentation are right. You'll also see some pretty important warnings. But the real heart of the report is this tricky little phrase called negative assurance. Let's zoom right in on that, because this phrase, negative assurance, is the single most important and probably the most confusing part of the entire report. Okay, this is so important. Negative assurance does not say, hey, the assumptions are good. It says the auditor found nothing to suggest the assumptions are unreasonable. It's a huge difference. It is not a green light. It's more like a flashing yellow light. The auditor's basically saying, look, we didn't find a reason to slam on the brakes, but you should definitely proceed with caution. And just in case there was any lingering doubt, every single one of these reports includes this final mandatory warning. It explicitly states that actual results will likely be different and that the difference could be huge. It's the ultimate reality check, just reminding you that no forecast is ever a guarantee.
So, what have we learned? An auditor's report isn't a stamp of approval. It's a professional, skeptical review of the process, not the outcome. Sure, it adds credibility, but it's not a guarantee. So the next time you see a company making some bold financial forecast, you'll know exactly how to read between the lines and look for the real story. The real question is, what will you see that everyone else might miss?